Welcome to Bloom, the place for highly sensitive change makers to be inspired to step into their power and be the missing link they are waiting for. Welcome, everyone. Today, I have the special pleasure of introducing a friend who is, his name is Rick Torseth, and he's a consultant and a leadership coach with many years of experience. We got to know each other actually through my husband, because they both went to Side Business School in HEC and got a master's degree in coaching and consulting for change. So you have serendipity here. Rick, you believe that leadership is not a position, but that leadership begins as a choice, that leadership is learned, and it is experienced as an action. And I found that is a wonderful nugget that we can talk about here. Leaders have an outsized responsibility to guide, lead, and build organizations that do good in the world and that do well by the people who work in those organizations. And that's a quote, from your homepage. And that puts us right into the topic. We're going to talk about leadership today. We're going to talk about messy things in leadership, problematic things, and how you can become a guiding light. So HSP change makers, listen up. This is going to be a very important episode for you. Rick, you've written a book amongst all the other things you've done, which is called Leading is Always a Choice. Tools for Action When Leading in a Hot Mess. But I have to admit that one of my favorite things about you is that you're a thought leader yourself, and you taught me great many things about how to be a thought leader, and I'm very grateful to you for that. And you're a wonderful guide through the swamp, what you call the swamp. And you have a very successful podcast that's called the 10,000 Swamp Leaders that I had the luck to be on. And I would like to pass the baton to you, telling us a little bit more about why did you call it 10,000 Swamp Leaders and what the swamp is? And also, how come you decided to lead in that way? Over to you.
Oh, wow. So first of all, Jolie, thank you for having me on your podcast. Turnabout is fair play, as you well know. So since I'm the guest, I get to throw wing ball things here that you didn't plan for. Gosh, there's a bunch of stuff here. I want to start at your beginning point, which is to say that your husband, Jan, and I are colleagues in the program, and he is a wonderful guy. And he kept in the dark for the longest time his spouse. And when I finally got to meet you, I thought, oh man, this is a dynamic couple. They got two different things going on, and they don't look like they match up technically, but I know they do harmonically. So it's just cool to be in the conversation with you. So thanks for having me. So let me take your question about the swamp, which I think requires a little bit of background. So most of the work that I do in leadership development, both coaching and also in group work, is targeted purposefully for people and challenges that they're facing that are highly complex and socially important. So, for example, climate change, global health, global development, racial equity, those kinds of things. Those tend to be quite intractable social problems, which is to say, no clear answer to them. And so the skill set to lead and get people involved in that is different than if you're dealing with technical problems where the challenges you face could be hard, but there is an answer to it. We know how to make cars, for example. We know how to build buildings. So this is a different world, and it calls for a different set of, I think, competencies and capacities to lead. I am, with due credit, I am highly influenced by the work of the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard, particularly the program run by Ron Heifetz, founded by Ron Heifetz and Marty Alinsky a long time ago, called Adaptive Leadership. And it's their thinking that I'm leaning on, which is leading is a choice and an activity. It can come from anywhere in the system. And usually always does when we think about the big social change movements that we've witnessed in the world. What my purpose is to help those people who've made a decision to work in that world of highly complex challenges and help them build the capacity that they need to lead. And that leading, one of its primary activities is to mobilize other people, because you can't do this by yourself. So you're trying to foster a kind of movement. And what are the skills to actually do that? That's craft. That's not accident. That's not random. That's craft. And so the work is to help them build that craft muscle, if you will, to be able to use themselves and mobilize people in that work. That's a long answer to your question, but
yeah,
probably
but
necessary.
it warrants a long answer because what you do is complex. You know, it may sound simple, but it's actually complex. So thank you very much for that. You know, setting the stage, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you were just summarizing that, I wanted to sort of go one step back, and that is, I think you heard of the term highly sensitive through me when we had discussions about things, and the verdict is still out whether you are highly sensitive or just very highly empathic, or whichever mix might be fitting you. But I don't think that for this podcast this is actually relevant. But what I want to say is the things that you just addressed in that summary are so relevant for many highly sensitive people, because we are system thinkers. It's something we actually like, meaning we tend to end up, and you will explain that later, in the swamp, because we see, we have the capacity to see and sense what's not working. Yeah. And then we can sense it actually at a more complex level than many other people do. And then you have added in that trait of many highly sensitives of saying, I want to contribute to change. And, you know, especially the people listening to this that want to actually build something, and usually, and you mentioned that as well, building community. And because we are wired that way, but we cannot find guiding lights in traditional leadership, because traditional leadership, anyway, the way I've experienced it, you know, many times in people that are very influential, that they are not serving a cause, but they actually are entitled. I'm the leader, so I'm entitled to something. And that is a very different way of leading than what you are talking about.
Yeah, it is. It's and it's, I think it's probably at the outset useful to put in an additional distinction here, which is the difference between leading and authority in organizational structures. And that's not to be pejorative to authority, because it's an essential attribute to a healthy organization. But to put a sort of visual to it, the organizational chart is a map of authority, not a map of leading. And we inherently know that as people who've lived and worked in the world for some period of time, meaning that two distinctions I would make to sharpen that. One is that authority is usually a description that is embedded in a position description in the org chart. So if you are in an organization, you have a certain vested authority that comes with the role you got. And if you leave the organization today and I replace you tomorrow, I get that authority and you leave it at the door when you walk out. So we know that's part of the structure of the organization. We also know inherently, if we've been around a while, that we can be embedded in that organization or in a society at large and see a need for leadership when we look up to the authority figures and they don't meet that moment.
Absolutely.
So that gap between authority and leading is a critical distinction for people who are thinking that they want to be active and use themselves, because invariably two things are going to happen. One is there's a need for it in the system, as you described. And two, you're not going to get asked to do it oftentimes. You're going to have to raise your own hand and step into it in order to get going. And so having the distinction that leading is a choice and an activity, not part of the structure, is a starting point for deciding. It puts it on me to say, okay, if it's a choice and an activity, I'm an adult or I'm a human being, I can choose. Am I going to do that? You know, so that moment of truth is really critical, but you get there by having that distinction, I think.
Very, very important point. Thank you for that. And I would like to take that a bit further, because you talk about, action and choice, and that if we take that further, it includes learning. So you don't, at the start, you don't know everything. You don't know how to do everything. And that can be a very scary aspect. And I would like to start with a quote that I actually found on your homepage.
Uh-oh.
We can sort of, return to the swamp maybe with that quote and with
Okay.
that aspect. Okay. So I am always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it, by Pablo Picasso. And you put that on your homepage, and it was hard to choose which one to take, but I think this one is highly relevant. And I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I hear that over and over again when people describe how they got to be where they are, how much learning was involved. And because I think we skipped that because we dove in immediately, let's keep that in mind. And maybe in that context, you could explain a bit more about your podcast and how it came about, and then maybe we can weave in that aspect.
Okay. Yeah, so let me give due credit to Pablo Picasso. So I had a minor in art history when I was in university. I should have stayed with it. I didn't do that. We maybe circle back to that one too.
Okay.
So I have high regard for him in his work and how he traveled, the journey he traveled. And I think that I'm a kinesthetic learner. I've always known that. I learn by doing. And so his quote also fits nicely into my learning style. So I'm not a book reader to learn. I'm not a verbal person to learn primarily. I can pick up some stuff that way, but primarily I got to get my hands dirty and I got to be doing it and make mistakes and screw up, and then learn from that. That feedback process is critical.
You learned basketball, right? I remember you had,
yeah. So sports is a kinesthetic process, so I think most of those people who are really great in those kinds of activities know that their whole body is a learning vehicle, not just their head, not just their eyes, not just their senses. That's the only way we can explain quick reactions to things that you go, how in the world they do that? Well, their body's in charge of that. They're moving. So I come with that, for better or for worse. How I got down this road with the podcast was because I worked with so many people who, in my view, as we've discussed, had already made a decision to lead and do something really challenging in the world for the common good. I had wanted to. I noticed that they tended to be modest, that their stories weren't widely known, and so I thought I create a forum podcast where they could share their stories, lessons learned, what they know, mistakes they've made. We learn more from our failures and our successes. And also the second tier reason was that there could be younger people on this leadership journey. And if they could pick up a few things in the conversation that could help their development, that would be great. So there's sort of an elder tribal thing going on in the conversation I have with my guests, passing wisdom or ideas on to future generations. That's the two-pronged strategy for me. The name, though, comes from a piece that I read years ago, and it never left me, and I copied it out of a book, and I have it all over the place, and I finally found a place to use the thing in the podcast. And it comes from a guy named Donald Schwann, who was an organizational development guy out of Harvard and MIT. And he writes in a book the dynamic that occurs for most adults, which is they reach a kind of point of technical competency in their life, usually in their late 30s, early 40s. And for some subset of those people, they arrive at a place where they're asking whether or not this skill is really what I want to do, where the answers are known, and it's an implementation life at that point. And some of those people make a decision to go into what he calls the swampy lowlands, and where the problems are ill-formed, they're hard to define, it's hard to make progress on them, and they're immensely challenging. And those people who go into that, take that route and go into the swamp, their lives turn out different. And it was their lives turn out different was the catalytic thing for me around what's happening here and what's the difference and how does that get utilized in the world. And so that's been sort of the center point of my work, and also certainly the podcast, because now I can actually get into it and find out what was that moment in time and how has your life turned out differently because of that decision. So I get to do that on a podcast. It's harder in the work, but it's easier in the podcast.
Yeah, but it's so inspiring, your podcast. I mean, because you drew people from, all kinds of countries, and they have all kinds of missions, and they are just simply inspiring in what they're trying to achieve. And I can, seriously say, anybody, go and listen to Rick's podcast if you're trying to build something, because it will inspire you a lot.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You did
and all your listeners should know you are a guest on one of the episodes, so they can be inspired by you as well. So
thank you. Thank you. So let's talk about, are there certain points in your life where you took, you made choices, or you made choices that took you in a different trajectory? I mean, I know I know later in life you definitely decided that you wanted to do things differently, and I know that you're actually planning to uproot your life yet again, coming to Europe. So, there's still a lot of sense of adventure in you.
Yeah, so you had told me that this would be a piece of our conversation, and it got me to thinking, is that really how my life has unfolded? Because it's my life and it can seem fairly mundane and boring a lot of times, so were there these flashpoints or these forks in the road or some such? And there are some major ones, but your question, Jolly, provoked me to think further back. And so I guess context matters a little bit. So I was the first child and grandchild for my grandparents and my parents in our family. Families that grew up in the Depression and World War II. And so this awakening coming out of that was a big deal. I was the first one to go to university in my family. That was a big deal. Lost on me that it was a big deal, but it was for them. And it was probably in that part of my life that it took me quite a long time to figure out I'm here in university not for me. I'm here for parents and grandparents. And by the time I sorted that out, I was so far into it that I thought, I can't start over again. I can't bear that. So I stuck it out and figured out I'll make something work after this. And I didn't really do that very well, actually. I donned a suit and tie and became sort of a proper worker that looked like I was supposed to be doing in the eyes of this audience of people on the balcony, my parents, grandparents, so I could show them that they and I had pulled it off. I was a good member of society with a proper job and it looked right. And I was miserable the entire time. And it was a long time of being miserable, to be honest with you.
Well, we can
so that's how it got started.
A long time.
Yeah.
Just trying to please other people.
Yeah, and not just other people. There's a whole generational pleasing going on for that generation. Just like I think that's probably true for my daughter and your kids and stuff. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on. Yeah. And my sense of it is it's a challenge to find your own voice and your own source of power and motivation. Because it's not cultivated very well in our society where I live. Let's put it that way.
No, it's not. It still isn't. Astonishingly, it's actually, sometimes I think it's actually getting worse.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, I'm past that now, and I'm trying to figure out what I do in the last part of my life.
Yeah, you've already done it. So when did you decide? I mean, it's very rarely one exact point, but there must have been a place and a time where you decided that pain of adapting was too large. and that it
Yeah,
wasn't.
there was a very specific moment, although I had to look back on it to realize that was the moment, but it is very much the case. I had moved to New York. I was working for a company in the finance world, and there was a need to train some people who needed the services we did in order to be able to do the work that they did. And so there was a training program designed, and they asked me to come in and do a section on the work that I did. It was in the World Trade Center, pre 9/11, way before pre 9/11, nearly on the top floor. It was I was thinking, what am I doing here in the middle of Lower Manhattan on the 105th floor of the World Trade Center doing a program? And I loved it. It was cool. I liked helping people. I liked doing a bit of teaching. I liked being in the dialogue of what we do with this and strategize it. And that turned out to be the starting point for me. I didn't have enough insight into my own experience to connect it to something next beyond the world that I was in. But when that ultimately happened, and happened through my wife, Teresa, actually, in a training company that she was working for, and I ended up becoming a trainer for them. And that is what put the pieces together for me, where I knew that I was more teacher, coach, facilitator. And I liked the ambiguity. I liked the uncertainty. I liked how anything could happen in the moment and being able to respond to it. And I found a place that felt like home for the first time. And that was probably 1994, something like that, 93, somewhere in there. And so I was kind of off and running at that point.
So I quote you with one HSP aspect after all, or yet another one I should actually say, and that is that desire for freedom. It's that desire to be creative, to be independent, to shape your own path, to be, you know, to mold and create information, for example, yeah, to, like you say, to teach, so that it's not a mundane task.
Yep.
A lot of the work in the financial world, I would say, is a mundane task because it's doing the same thing over and over and over again with one goal: to generate more money for the system. Yeah. And you know, it's not to say, you know, generating money is bad. I don't want to go into that discussion at all. But and that again takes us back to your podcast, is that desire for something else to be there, for something, for either for the common good, or to support others, or to make life easier for people that are suffering. I hear that over and over and over again. You know, with highly sensitive people that I work with, that come and seek help with me, that they say, I don't have meaning in my life. I have a job without meaning. I'm just making money, and I just can't keep doing that. I need some reorientation. I need some advice. I need to find, or to find again what actually makes me joyful. So that fits really, really well, you know, to point that out as a turning point.
Yeah, and I would say in my case, and this won't be true for everybody, but in my case, the other serious sort of innate aspect of who I was, but didn't again see this until later on, was I have a long, consistent history of being highly engaged in being on teams. Being on teams has provided for me the most enriching experiences of my life, other than my family. And inherent with being on a team that is effective is a combination of give and take and sharing and collaboration and sorting out challenges. There's no high performing team that doesn't have to deal with that kind of stuff. And I like that. And I like that community of that. So I extended it out as I got older to see that what I really am quite enthralled with and wanting to be active in is community building for the common good. And because it takes a community, it takes a movement to make social change and impact. And you have to have the skills to get along with each other in order to ultimately realize a larger goal than you can pull off on your own. And we're not, generally speaking, well versed in those collaborative skills and human relation skills to do that work well without a lot of grit. And so part of it is to smooth that out a little bit.
So take courage, HSPs, listen, because we are so community orientated. We are so much in need of true, authentic communication. And as I, say in my other talks, we need to create that for ourselves. We need to step out of the victim place of saying, well, society is so bad and it doesn't offer us that opportunity, because at the moment it's not an easy way to make a career out of. But as I keep saying, we are the missing link. We are the ones, like I say in my introduction, we are waiting for, we are needed. That skill to be able to work in community, for communities, to authentically want to be with other people and create something, and is essential for what's going on right now. It's absolutely essential. And you are one of the teachers, Rick. That's why I wanted you on the podcast. It took you a long way to get there, but you are.
I hope so. That's the thing that keeps me moving. I concur with everything you're saying here, and I would add a piece that we haven't discussed, because it's inevitable that a person who's doing or trying to get where we're talking about will end up in this place too, which is at some point you got to be a follower, a good follower to another person who's got something big to play in, and you want to be part of that. And learning this craft of the work of following is an essential part, because in doing what you're helping people do, or what I help people do, those people will end up in both of those dances, leading, following, and we need to be balanced in our capacity to do both. It gives us great potential for power and impact, but to the extent that we're deficient in let's say, on the follower side, it diminishes impact, because you're going to end up having to co-join and end up being in a follower opportunity from time to time. And so that skill is I'm putting a plug in for followership as another element, and it's a choice as well. Am I going to follow you and give up part of what I've been leading for a while, because I think what you're up to has greater impact, and I want to be part of that. And if I'm in as a follower, I'm in as a follower, not a leader to start with.
Yeah, I think this is a great point. And I'm trying to think about the English word. I can't think of it now. It's the opposite of pride. When you have that ability to actually know when there is somebody who knows better than you do about a particular set of skills or information or something that needs to be done to get, to propel the mission forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not a talent that I think, well, let's talk about that in the way, is that or is it not? I was going to say it's not a skill that many leaders have, but you have so much more knowledge about that. Is it just that in our society that particular type of leadership is not fostered, or is that a problem with leadership in itself, or is it just the way we see it?
Or all of the above. And not all of the above, meaning it's complicated, it's messy, right?
Really?
I think that but to your point, and to the people who are listening, there is a tactical move that people who have made a choice to lead and create a movement and get people to follow them, and for the sake of the common good, let's assume that all those pieces are in place, because we can get people to follow us and for anything other than the common good quite easily. We know that. History tells us that. Yeah. So one of the things that happens when a person is made that decision and they actually have followers and they're doing this important work is they can get elevated to a kind of pedestal position. Mm-hmm. And that's very seductive and intoxicating. And it can happen before you know it's happening. And suddenly you're there, but you weren't suddenly there. You were there a while ago and you didn't catch it. And so that doesn't scale, among other things, for impact. It just doesn't get it done. And so the wise move that people who have been around for a while and in this position understand is, one, they can get seduced by the followers. And the seduction can be, I take your work back and do it myself because you've made a case that it's hard or something like that. So the seduction, they're better at seducing than I am at noticing I'm being seduced. There's a lag usually in there for a lot of people. The counter to that is to give work back to people, purposely give people work back and make it clear that that's what's happening. So it's very transparent. I'm giving you this work because A, I believe you can do it, and here's why I believe you can do it. Boom, 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 boom. Here's what we're trying to get done. Let's remember that. I'm available if you need questions and help, but you go do this work. That's why we're here. Yeah, and we need you to do your part. We need that person over there. We need us all to do the things we do, so we string them together and we make progress on this really hard challenge. And so sometimes it's about challenging adults to be adults. To do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it in the form they said they do it in. That's how you came to be on this team. So let's go do our jobs. And I am available if you have questions, but I will not take your work back from you.
So what you're pointing at, if I understand that correctly, is that there's a shared responsibility, that good leadership has that aspect of acknowledging the contribution that others bring to the common mission, rather than sort of collecting all the praise for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is because that's the only way the work scales. I mean, if we want to have big impact, we need to share the work and everything, all the fruits that come from that, and including all the failures that come from that. What did we learn? How do we screw this up? How do we make a mess of this? What's our contribution to the mess that we're trying to solve here? So it's a very active process, and it's alive, and it's sometimes messy and frustrating, socially complex. But there is, in my mind, there is no greater, cooler moment than to be part of a group of people who pull something off that was hard and was rewarding and had impact in the world. That's about as good as it gets.
So let's talk about courage. You say that courage is freedom and anxiety. You say that also on your homepage, and I love that, because that is actually very deeply my experience, that I go, I oscillate from anxiety to freedom to courage and back and forth. Would you like to explain a bit or expand on this?
Sure. So one of my significant influences in my professional and personal life is from a body of work called The Human Element, designed by a guy named Will Schutz. Will has passed on. I would argue that he's had the most impact on my personal thinking and also my way I think about helping people. And he has in there a pretty basic model, which is that we human beings are oriented by three needs: being significant, being competent, and being liked, or in an interpersonal way, loved. So if you're in an organizational setting, if I'm a manager, a leader, a person of authority, and I've got a team of people here, and we're trying to do X, Y, and Z, it behooves me to understand what the particular concoction of those three elements are for the individuals, because it could be all different. For example, in my case, I'm very low on significance as a need. I'm very high on relationships in an interesting, dynamic way, and it's important for me to be seen as competent in the world. That's how I get work. So if I'm blind to those needs, those become a kind of unquenched hunger that causes me to do weird things in pursuit of what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And so I think that it's a leader's job on a team is to not only know that the strategy and the tactics and the outcome and the impact you're trying to have, but how do you keep the individuals and the collective moving in a direction that gets the work done and also addresses these basic human needs that they have.
Exactly.
And it's gonna, unfortunately, it's a little complicated because yours are going to be different than mine and to the third person in some ratio. I can't have everybody get the same thing and think they're all going to be happy, but they also can't expect to get the same thing and always be happy. So there's a give and take there. But I think it's important to make that explicit and to have that be transparent as part of the design of who we are and what we're trying to do as a team, rather than mystical and magical or anything like that. That doesn't help. So I think there's a challenge there to understand it, speak to it directly, and honor it, and then use it before it uses you, because you'll get blindsided by it if you're blind to it.
So what I hear, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this anxiety and the freedom are, also the amount of anxiety or freedom that experience is also influenced by how much we can actually share with others, share the responsibility, share our mission, share emotions, share, look, I have a problem here. Can we address that as a community? So that courage, and I would actually say that is a courage in our society to do things in a different way, to be more open, to communicate in a clearer way, to have less hierarchy, to have shared responsibility, and so on and so on.
Yeah, so I feel like I haven't answered your question though. So let me try it using myself as an example. So for example, in Will's model, I have a high desire to be in control of the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stumbled upon his work and understood it, I realized I've had that my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I have oriented myself a lot of times to hold on to that. And that means that sometimes it can be very hard to collaborate with, because I want my way, because I think my way's the way. Well, that's great if I'm willing to accept that, therefore, the level of impact I have is directly related to everything I can touch, and I can only touch so much. And that's it. That's the size of my impact then. But if the impact is to be at scale and to get work done through other people, I got to give up something here to collaborate more. And so for me, where the courage aspect comes into play is, one, to catch it and see that it's happening, but more to the point is to actually tell people this is how I am, and I run the risk, I suppose, in those situations of being rejected or dismissed or something, because I've been more open about a weakness that I have or a tendency I have to get myself in trouble than people are comfortable with, and it changes the way they interact with me, etc. So I for me, courage in an organization tends to be much more interpersonal. I mean, we're not being asked, if firefighters are asked to go into burning buildings, that's a different thing. Most of my clients, they don't have that gig.
No, but for many people, and I think that's the correct word here, vulnerability is like going into a house that's on fire. Yeah, especially in business meetings and, in that world. And I think what you're saying here, in a way, is that vulnerability and courage are also related in our context. How vulnerable are you willing to be in order to get people to work together towards a common goal?
Yeah,
I love Brené Brown's work. Anybody who's interested, go and read Brené Brown's stuff on vulnerability in the business context. It's great.
I think it's, I agree with you. I think courage and vulnerability are the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers of life in an organization. They are dance partners. You cannot separate them at all. And I think that, so this could be abstract for some of your listeners. So let's put some part of it on the ground. So, okay. So if a listener's saying, okay, so I get that, and I can flash on moments when I've been in that place and I didn't show up the way I wanted to. How could I do it different, given what you're talking about here? And I think, and this isn't to say what I'm going to say is easy to do, but it is a move to make, which is the strategy that I learned, and I found it to be very effective and useful and hard, is first truth first. And that first truth is usually about me and some anxiety or fear that I have. It's not about you. It's not about the circumstances, not about the situation. First truth first. It starts with me, and it's about some concern I have. And what I have found is if I can figure out a way to articulate that, people step into that rather than back away from it. And now we got something to do. Now we can go.
Now we can engage on a completely different level.
Whole different world.
Of human contact. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to ask you my last question, which I actually nicked from you, from your podcast, because I just think it's such a brilliant last question. What, did I not ask you that you think is relevant in this context, that that would be supportive of this change maker community?
The question that comes up is maybe what's the common denominator? Is there a common denominator? And if so, what is it that I've learned from working with all sorts of people who are trying to learn how to lead? And dang, I wish I hadn't come up with that answer to your question, because now I actually have to think about it.
I love it though. We're going to go over. If it takes longer, we're going to go over, because it's such a wonderful aspect.
I think that what I've witnessed and experienced, and I've not researched this, I'm just going off of the human interactions I've had with people for a long time who are in this conversation, is the yearning to lead themselves into a better life than the one they're having. I say better life, you shouldn't say, into a more productive, helpful life to a larger cause. How do I use myself? Yeah. How do I use myself in pursuit of something I give a damn about? And they don't necessarily have great answers to that, because we don't deal with that in our societies very well. So what I found is that those people who can sort of connect, or they connect with me or somebody like me who can help them, they're quite thirsty and game to get on with it and build some craft. And I think the other part that I would say I've learned is that sometimes it's helpful, and a lot of them don't show up with this initially, is to make help them navigate a connection place in the real tactical world where they're going to live, so they could actually do that in that world. So it's not abstract. Yeah. In the real world, the concrete world, it's not abstract, it's not theoretical. It's like, I live in this world and I'm trying to have impact in this space doing this. And so those two parts, I think, are the parts that I've learned are often in the background for people when I'm working. And the sooner we can get them into the foreground, then the more ways we have in which to calibrate actions and activities in a purposeful way. Otherwise, it's a little too abstract, a little 10,000 feet off the ground. We want to get it on the ground at some point, because the world needs us on the ground doing the things we do with real human beings. Totally.
And I'm really looking forward to you reaching your goal of collecting 10,000 swamp leaders. And I wonder, when you reach that goal, what you will do next.
I got a bargain with the big person in the sky, get more time to get to 10 grand, I think, but I'm working on it. I tell you that.
Yeah. You're going to get there. I'm sure you're going to get there. So thank you very, very much, Rick, for having shared so competently and honestly.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's a cool role reversal to be in the opposite chair having this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so did I.
Thank you.
Thank you.